and his wife had just told him he was an embarrassment. The words didn't crash into the room. They landed with the quiet, devastating precision of a sniper's bullet. It was 7:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, in the cavernous master bedroom of their 5-bedroom, $4.2 million River Oaks home. Sunlight, thick and golden as Houston honey, streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air between them. Talia stood before a full-length gold-leaf mirror, a vision in a sapphire blue gown that had cost more than the first car Maverick had ever owned. The dress was a custom Roland Mouret, a $7,800 whisper of silk that clung to her frame. She was adjusting a diamond necklace, a piece Maverick had bought her for their 3rd anniversary, its 12 carats and $120,000 price tag flashing under the recessed lighting. He was standing by the closet, holding his own suit. It was a classic black tuxedo from Tom Ford, impeccably tailored, a $6,500 garment he'd worn only twice. He thought it was appropriate for the Houston Energy Industry Awards. He thought he was supposed to be her date. "What did you just say?" Maverick asked. His voice was quiet, stripped of emotion. It was the voice he used on oil rigs when a pressure valve was failing, and panic was not an option. Talia didn't turn from the mirror. She tilted her head, admiring the way the diamonds caught the light. "I said, I don't think you should come, Mav. The awards, they're a certain kind of crowd, polished." She finally met his eyes in the reflection, her own expression a placid mask of concern that didn't quite hide the flicker of disdain. "Your energy, it's just not right for it. You'd embarrass me." Embarrass her? The words settled into the quiet space in his chest, where, moments before, anticipation had lived. He thought of his hands. Even when scrubbed clean, they bore the faint cartography of a life spent working. Calluses on his palms from gripping steel wrenches in the Gulf of Mexico, a thin white scar on his left thumb from a slipped pipe fitting when he was 22 and earning $18 an hour. He had built his company, Apex Offshore Solutions, from nothing but a used pickup truck and a set of tools he'd paid for in installments. He'd sold a majority stake to Schlumberger for a sum that still felt unreal. A figure that allowed for houses like this and necklaces like the one she wore. Yet his hands still knew the feel of grease and salt. "I see," he said. The tuxedo suddenly felt heavy in his hands, a costume for a part he had not been cast in. "So you're going alone?" She finally turned to face him, a practiced, sympathetic smile on her lips. "Oh no, of course not. That would look strange. Donovan is going to accompany me. He understands these events. He moves in those circles so effortlessly." Donovan. Her ex-boyfriend. A man who managed a boutique art gallery downtown and wore $900 loafers without socks. A man whose hands had never held anything heavier than a champagne flute. A man whose circles were funded by a trust fund his great-grandfather had established a century ago. The humiliation was a physical thing, a cold wave that started in his gut and radiated outward. He had built an empire from the mud of the ocean floor, managed logistics across 3 continents, and negotiated deals that shaped a sector of the global energy market. But in this sun-drenched, climate-controlled room, he was being told he wasn't polished enough to sit at a table and eat a $300 plate of salmon. He carefully hung the Tom Ford tuxedo back in its garment bag. The motion was slow, deliberate. He zipped it up, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. "All right, Talia," he said, his voice as calm and flat as a windless sea. "You and Donovan have a good time." She beamed, the relief on her face so stark it was an insult in itself. "Oh, thank you for understanding, darling. I knew you would. It's just for the best." She glided over to him, the silk of her dress rustling, and gave him a perfunctory kiss on the cheek. Her perfume, a $450 bottle of Baccarat Rouge 540, lingered in the air after she swept out of the room. Maverick stood there for a long time, looking at the empty space where she had been. He had no idea what was coming, but a quiet, cold certainty began to form in his mind. She had made a critical mistake. Have you ever felt completely underestimated by someone who was supposed to be on your side? It's a unique kind of pain, and it can either break you or forge you into something stronger. Let us know in the comments if you've ever had to prove someone wrong who should have believed in you from the start. Their life was a carefully curated facade of domestic normalcy, each detail dollar-tagged and polished for public consumption. The River Oaks house was the centerpiece, a sprawling 8,000-square-foot modern Tudor with interiors designed by a firm that charged a $50,000 retainer just to consider a project. The landscaping alone, with its manicured boxwoods and imported Italian cypress trees, had an annual maintenance budget of $75,000. Maverick had bought the house before they were married, a raw display of his success, a place he thought they could build a real life. For Talia, it was simply the correct address. Mornings were a silent ballet. Maverick would be up at 5 a.m., his internal clock still set to the rhythms of offshore life. He'd be in his home gym, a space equipped with $60,000 worth of techno gym equipment, while Talia slept in their custom-made $35,000 Heston's bed under a $2,000 fret linen duvet. When he finished, he'd make coffee using a $6,000 La Marzocco espresso machine, grinding beans that cost $80 a pound. He'd drink his black, standing at the massive marble island that had cost $45,000 to quarry and install. Talia would emerge around 8:30 a.m., wrapped in a $1,200 La Perla silk robe, and he would have a perfect cappuccino waiting for her in a $150 Richard Ginori cup. "Thank you, darling," she would murmur, not quite looking at him as she scrolled through her phone, checking the social feeds of her friends. Their garage was another stage set. Her car was a pearl-white Maserati Levante, a $92,000 SUV he'd paid for in cash as a birthday gift. His was a 5-year-old Ford F-250 King Ranch, a $70,000 truck with 90,000 miles on it, its leather seats worn and comfortable. It was the same truck he used to visit his remaining offshore sites. Talia hated it. "It's so agricultural, Mav," she'd once said, wrinkling her nose as he parked it next to her pristine Maserati. "Can't you just drive the Range Rover?" The Range Rover was a $140,000 autobiography he'd bought for them to use on weekends. But it mostly sat gathering dust. Too generic for her, too ostentatious for him. Dinners were performative. Twice a week, they would eat at home, meals prepared by a private chef who charged $600 per visit plus the cost of groceries. The chef specialized in the kind of delicate multi-course meals Talia felt were appropriate for their station. Maverick would sit at the head of their 12-foot, $22,000 restoration hardware dining table, pushing a microgreen salad around his plate, thinking about the simple, hearty meals he used to share with his crew on the rigs. He missed the easy camaraderie, the shared laughter over simple food after a hard day's work. With Talia, the conversation was always about acquisitions, not of companies, but of things. A new painting for the foyer, a potential membership at the River Oaks Country Club, $100,000 initiation fee, a table at a new restaurant where the tasting menu was $450 per person. He tried to talk about his work, about the new scholarship program he was funding at Texas A&M for aspiring petroleum engineers from underprivileged backgrounds. He'd pledged an initial $2 million. Talia would listen with a distracted air, her eyes glazed over. "That's nice, dear," she'd say before changing the subject. "Did I tell you the Abernathys are having their entire pool retiled with imported Moroccan zellige? It's costing them a fortune." The implication was always clear. His work, the very engine that funded their life, was the grimy, unmentionable part of their story. Her role was to spend the money beautifully, to build a glittering facade of taste and class that could obscure the scent of crude oil he carried in his history. He remembered one evening vividly. They were hosting a small dinner party for a few of her friends. One of the guests, a man who had inherited a commercial real estate portfolio, was holding court about his latest trip to Monaco. Maverick, trying to engage, mentioned a recent challenge they'd faced on a deep-water project in the Gulf. "We had a blowout preventer that was giving us faulty pressure readings at 10,000 feet, he began. So we had to deploy a remote-operated vehicle to—" Talia cut him off with a bright, brittle laugh. "Oh, darling, let's not bore everyone with shop talk." She placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, her grip surprisingly firm. "No one wants to hear about your plumbing problems." The table chuckled politely. Donovan, who was there that night, gave Maverick a look of pitying amusement. In that moment, Maverick wasn't the CEO of an $80 million company. He was just a plumber, a roughneck who had stumbled into a world where he didn't belong. He felt the heat rise in his neck, but he just smiled, retreated into himself, and let the conversation about Monaco flow around him. He saw it clearly then. He wasn't a husband to her. He was a sponsor. A walking, talking bank account with dirty hands. The cruelty wasn't a sudden storm. It was a slow, rising tide, a series of small, cutting remarks and dismissive gestures that eroded his sense of self within their home. The Energy Industry Awards were not an isolated incident, but the culmination of a long campaign of quiet humiliation. Maverick began to see the pattern, to recognize the escalating betrayal in the smallest of details. A month before the awards, Talia had insisted they attend a charity auction for the Houston Museum of Fine Arts. It was her kind of event, black tie, filled with old money and the city's social elite. Maverick had been talking to an older gentleman, a retired Exxon executive named Arthur, about the complexities of subsea engineering. They were having a genuinely interesting conversation. Talia had glided up, looping her arm through his. "There you are," she'd purred, before turning to Arthur. "You must forgive my husband. He gets so passionate about his work. It's all nuts and bolts to me." She'd laughed, a light tinkling sound that made Maverick's skin crawl. She had reduced his life's work, a field of incredible innovation and danger, to a hardware store aisle. Later that night, as they were getting ready for bed, she'd said, "You really should try to talk about other things, Mav. People aren't interested in the technical stuff. It makes you seem one-dimensional." Then there was the matter of his clothes. Maverick preferred simple, well-made clothing. He wore $150 Page jeans and $200 John Varvatos shirts when he wasn't in a suit. For him, clothes were functional. For Talia, they were a statement, and she felt his statement was all wrong. She began buying him clothes, leaving boxes from Neiman Marcus on their bed, cashmere sweaters that cost $1,500, Italian-made shirts that felt flimsy and restrictive. "I just thought your wardrobe could use a little elevation," she'd explained. He tried wearing one of the sweaters once. It felt like a costume. "See?" she'd said, clapping her hands together. "You look so much more refined. Less like you just stepped off a boat." The compliment was laced with so much poison it felt like an insult. Her phone calls with Donovan became more frequent. She would take them in the garden room, a glass-walled conservatory filled with orchids that had a standing weekly maintenance bill of $500. She would laugh, a genuine, uninhibited sound he rarely heard directed at him. Once, he walked by and heard her say, "Oh, you know, Mav, he's sweet, but it's like trying to explain color to a blind man. He just doesn't get it." He didn't know what it was, but he knew he was on the outside of it. He felt like a ghost in his own home, the silent provider of the stage on which her real life was performed. The planning for the Energy Awards was the final, brutal act. It dominated her conversations for weeks. She spent an entire afternoon at the Galleria, finally settling on the $7,800 Roland Mouret gown. She had 3 separate hair and makeup trials at $500 each. She talked endlessly about the guest list, who would be seated at which table, the potential for being photographed for the society pages. And through it all, she spoke as if she were going alone. "I need to make a good impression," she said one evening, scrolling through photos of past events on her iPad. "This is where the real Houston is, not out on some rusty platform in the middle of the ocean." The casual cruelty of the remark stunned him. Those rusty platforms were monuments of modern engineering, marvels of human ingenuity that powered the world. They were the source of the very money that paid for the iPad in her hands and the roof over her head. He wanted to scream, to grab her by the shoulders and make her see the hypocrisy. But he just stayed silent. Arguing felt pointless. It was like trying to reason with the wind. The week of the event, the betrayal became explicit. He was in his home office, a space paneled in dark walnut, with a custom $18,000 desk. He had left his office to get a glass of water when he heard her speaking in the hallway, her voice a low, conspiratorial murmur on the phone. "Don't worry, it's handled," she was saying. "He's not coming." No, of course not. Can you imagine? He'd probably try to talk to Harold Vance about drilling mud. It would be a total disaster. You and I can just go and have a wonderful time, like civilized people. He backed away from the door, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. It was one thing to be thought an embarrassment. It was another to be conspired against, to be mocked and discarded in favor of a man who represented everything he was not. He went back into his office and sat behind his large desk, the leather of his $4,000 Eames chair creaking softly. He looked out the window at the perfectly manicured lawn, a green so perfect it looked artificial. His life felt the same way, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he was done living inside it. The facade was about to come down, and he would be the one to push it over. The discovery, when it happened, was not a dramatic confrontation or an overheard confession. It was a quiet moment of clarity in the place he felt most himself, the corner office of Apex Offshore Solutions. His headquarters weren't in the gleaming glass towers of downtown Houston. He'd bought and retrofitted a 50,000 square foot warehouse in the industrial district near the Port of Houston, a place that smelled of salt, diesel, and welding fumes. His office overlooked the vast shop floor where his teams serviced and assembled subsea equipment. The view to him was more beautiful than any skyline. It was the Wednesday before the awards gala. He was reviewing the company's philanthropic commitments for the year. His assistant, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Maria, who had been with him since the beginning, had left a neat stack of folders on his desk. He worked his way through them. The A&M Scholarship Fund, a donation to a local STEM program for high schoolers, a community garden project his employees ran. The last folder was thicker than the others. It was labeled HEIA Keynote Sponsorship. He opened it. The first page was a contract with the Houston Energy Industry Awards Organizing Committee. His eyes scanned the details. Apex Offshore Solutions, even after the sale, retained a philanthropic arm that he controlled completely. That entity was listed as the sole underwriter for the evening's keynote address and the recipient of the Industry Pioneer Award. The amount of the sponsorship was printed in bold, undeniable type, $2,400,000. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were observing the scene from a great distance. He, Maverick, the man deemed too unpolished to even attend the event, was its single largest financial backer. He was paying for the champagne Talia and Donovan would be drinking. He was paying for the floral arrangements, the orchestra, the very stage on which the night's events would unfold. He flipped the page. There was a copy of the wire transfer confirmation dated 6 months prior, and then he saw the line item for the keynote speaker. Speaker to be provided by Apex Philanthropic Arm. Name to be confirmed no later than 48 hours prior to event. A final page was a logistical summary, including an entry that made his breath catch. Rooftop helipad access, Toyota Center. Granted for keynote speaker arrival/departure. Cleared for Sikorsky S-76 or similar class. Arrival window, 7:45 p.m. to 7:55 p.m. Central Standard Time. The entire plan bloomed in his mind in a single, incandescent moment. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. It was about recalibrating a world that had been tilted on its axis by his wife's casual disdain. He picked up his phone, the sleek, heavy device, feeling solid and real in his hand. He didn't call Talia. He didn't call his lawyer yet. He called the event organizer, a woman named Cynthia Webb, whose number was on the contract. "Cynthia, Maverick here," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm calling to confirm the details for the keynote speaker on Friday." Yes, that's right, the name is Maverick. Just Maverick. "And I need to confirm the logistics for my arrival. I'll be utilizing the rooftop access. My pilot will send over the flight plan. We'll be touching down at 7:53 p.m. exactly." There was a brief silence on the other end, then a flurry of professional confirmation. After he hung up, Maverick swiveled his chair to face the window overlooking the shop floor. Below, a team of his engineers, their faces smudged with grease, were working on a massive piece of machinery, their movements precise and coordinated. They were the people who made the world run, the ones with the know-how and the grit to pull energy from the bottom of the sea. They were his people, and his wife thought they, and by extension he, were an embarrassment. A cold, hard anger, pure and clean as a diamond, settled in his heart. He was not an embarrassment. He was the foundation, and he was about to remind everyone of that fact. For the next 2 days, he played the part of the understanding, slightly wounded husband. It was the most difficult performance of his life. He moved through their beautiful, empty house like an actor on a set, every line and gesture carefully considered. He was gathering evidence, not for a court of law, but for the court of his own conscience, steeling his resolve for what was to come. On Thursday evening, Talia was in their walk-in closet, which was the size of a small apartment, deciding between 2 pairs of Jimmy Choo heels, one a classic nude pump for $750, the other a strappy silver sandal for $995. "Which do you think?" she asked, holding them up. She was asking for his opinion on an event he was forbidden from attending. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. "The silver," he said, his voice even. "They'll catch the light." He was leaning against the doorframe, watching her. He felt a profound sense of distance, as if he were a scientist observing a foreign species. "Good choice," she said, preening in the mirror. "Donovan will love them." She said it so casually, the name of her ex-boyfriend a simple fact in their conversation. Later that night, he saw her phone light up on the nightstand beside their bed. It was a text from Donovan. Maverick didn't have to pick it up. The preview on the lock screen was enough. It read, "Can't wait for tomorrow night. So much better than having the oil baron breathing down our necks. See you at 6? The oil baron." That was him. A caricature, a joke between them. He turned away, the words burning themselves into his memory. He lay in their $35,000 bed, staring into the darkness, and felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness where his love for her used to be. He wasn't just losing a wife, he was amputating a part of his life that had become toxic, a source of constant low-grade poison. On Friday, the day of the awards, he acted as if it were any other day. He went to the office. He held his meetings. He reviewed schematics for a new deepwater ROV. At 4 p.m., he wished her a good evening via text. "Have a wonderful time tonight, you look beautiful." He pressed send, the lie feeling like ash in his mouth. Her reply came a minute later. "Thank you, darling. So sweet of you to understand. Don't wait up. So." He didn't reply. He put his phone down on his desk and looked at the clock. 3 hours and 53 minutes. He felt a profound stillness settle over him. It was the same feeling he got just before a major operation began, the calm before the controlled storm. He was ready. His first call after the decision solidified had been to his attorney, a formidable black woman named Alani Adebayo. Her firm was on the 50th floor of the Williams Tower, and her hourly billing rate was $1,200. She was worth every penny. He'd met with her on Thursday morning, laying out the situation with the same dispassionate clarity he would use to describe a failing piece of equipment. She said I would embarrass her, he concluded, sitting in a leather chair across from her glass desk. The Houston skyline spread out behind her like a kingdom. Alani listened without interruption, her fingers steepled. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "And the assets?" "The house on River Oaks Lane is in my name only, purchased 2 years before the marriage," Maverick said. "My majority stake in Apex was sold to Schlumberger, but the proceeds went into a pre-existing irrevocable trust, also established before the marriage. She is not a beneficiary." "And your joint accounts?" "We have one. A checking account for household expenses. I transfer $50,000 into it on the first of every month. The current balance is around $18,000. She has her own credit cards, which are tied to that account." Alani allowed herself a small, thin smile. "Mr. Maverick, you are a very methodical man. This will be clean. In Texas, assets acquired before the marriage are separate property. The house is yours. The trust is yours. She will be entitled to half of the community property accumulated during the marriage, which, from the sound of it, is a checking account with $18,000 in it and whatever depreciating assets she has purchased." "The cars?" Maverick asked. "The Maserati was a gift. That's hers. Your truck is yours. The Range Rover, if purchased during the marriage with marital funds, will be considered community property. We can offer her that in the settlement. It's a small concession." The entire meeting took less than 30 minutes. Alani's paralegal began drafting the divorce petition while they were still speaking. It would be ready to file on Wednesday morning, giving Maverick the weekend to execute his plan. "The petition will cite irreconcilable differences," Alani said as he stood to leave. "It's no fault, but her behavior, it provides context. Keep a record of everything." Maverick nodded. "I have the texts." "Good," Alani said. "Now go do what you need to do. We'll handle the rest." His next phase of planning was purely logistical. He met with his pilot, a former Marine aviator named Jackson, at a private hangar at Hobby Airport. They stood before the sleek corporate beauty of the Sikorsky S-76, a $13 million helicopter that was the jewel of his company's small air fleet. "The Toyota Center rooftop," Jackson said, looking over the flight plan on a tablet. "Tight landing zone, but we've done trickier. Wind shear off the downtown buildings will be the main variable. We'll need to be precise." 7:53 p.m. touchdown, Maverick reiterated. "Not a minute before, not a minute after. The keynote starts at 8 p.m. The organizers will have someone waiting for me at the helipad to escort me directly backstage." Jackson grinned. "Making an entrance, boss?" "Making a statement," Maverick corrected quietly. He spent Friday afternoon preparing his speech. He didn't write it out. He just sat in his quiet office, surrounded by the blueprints and models of his life's work, and thought about what he wanted to say. He wouldn't mention Talia. He wouldn't mention betrayal. His speech would be about the future of energy, about the courage and ingenuity of the men and women who worked offshore, about the responsibility they had to power the world and protect the planet. It would be about character, about building things that last, about the difference between value and price. It would be a tribute to the world she despised, delivered on a stage paid for by its success. The final piece of his plan was the award. The Industry Pioneer Award was not a surprise he was receiving. It was an honor his own philanthropic arm had endowed and designated for him. It was a strategic move made months ago to cement his legacy post-sale. He had been meant to accept it quietly. Now it would be part of a much larger, more public declaration. He arranged for the Houston Chronicle's business section photographer, a man he knew from a previous feature, to be present. He wanted a record. He wanted a picture that would appear in the Sunday paper, a photograph of him on that stage, holding that award, the very picture of a man who was the opposite of an embarrassment. He wanted Talia and Donovan to see it over their morning coffee. At 6 p.m., he left his office. He didn't go home. Home was no longer his. It was just a house, a stage for a play he was no longer in. He drove his F250 to the airport, the worn leather of the seats a familiar comfort. He changed not into a tuxedo, but into a custom-made Brioni suit, a deep charcoal gray that cost $8,000. It was a suit that signified power, not festivity. It was armor. As he boarded the helicopter, the sun was setting over Houston, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. The city lights began to glitter below, a sprawling galaxy of human endeavor. He felt a profound sense of peace. The storm was coming, but he was in the eye of it, calm and in control. The strike began at 7:45 p.m. Central Standard Time. Inside the Toyota Center, the ballroom was a universe of manufactured glamour. 3,000 of the most powerful people in the energy sector were seated at round tables, draped in white linen. The floral centerpieces were towering creations of orchids and hydrangeas, each one costing over $1,000. The air hummed with the sound of clinking glasses and confident conversation. At table 12, front and center, Talia was holding court. She was radiant in her sapphire gown, her diamond necklace a beacon of light. Donovan sat beside her, looking pleased with himself in a velvet dinner jacket. He was telling an amusing story about a difficult artist, and Talia was laughing, her head thrown back. She felt triumphant. She had successfully curated her evening, excising the one element, her husband, that she felt clashed with the polished perfection of it all. "You were so right about this tea," Donovan murmured, leaning in close. "It's so much more relaxing. No need to worry about him trying to discuss fracking with the mayor." Talia smiled, a small, secret smile of satisfaction. "I told you. It's just better this way. For everyone." She took a sip of her $300 a bottle champagne and scanned the room, feeling a deep sense of belonging. This was her world. She had finally arrived. 800 feet above them, Maverick was descending. The Sikorsky S-76 cut through the night sky, its engines a muted roar that was imperceptible on the ground. Through the cockpit window, Maverick saw the Toyota Center grow larger, its rooftop a flat, dark expanse marked by a circle of lights. The city spread out around them, a breathtaking tapestry of light and steel. His city, a city he had helped to power. At 7:51 p.m., Jackson's voice came through the headset, calm and professional. 2 minutes to touchdown. Winds are steady out of the southeast at 10 knots. This is a go. Maverick didn't reply. He simply watched as the helipad rushed up to meet them. Inside the ballroom, the MC, a local news anchor, was at the podium. And now, ladies and gentlemen, before we present our keynote speaker, we have a special presentation, the Industry Pioneer Award, an award that recognizes an individual whose vision and tenacity have reshaped the landscape of our industry. Talia leaned forward, intrigued. She loved the awards part of the evening. It was all about power and recognition. At 7:53 p.m. exactly, the helicopter's skids touched the concrete of the rooftop with a gentle bump. The sound was completely absorbed by the city's ambient noise. The rotors began to slow. A figure in a dark suit was waiting, an event organizer with a security detail. He opened the helicopter door. Maverick stepped out into the cool night air. The wind whipped at his suit, but he stood for a moment, looking out over the city. Back inside, the MC continued. This year's recipient is a man who started with little more than a toolbox and an unshakable belief in himself. He built a company from the ground up, revolutionizing subsea engineering and deep water extraction. Though he recently sold his company to Schlumberger, his legacy continues through his groundbreaking patents and his generous philanthropic work. A low, rhythmic thumping sound began to permeate the ballroom. It was subtle at first, a vibration felt more than heard. A few people looked up at the ceiling, puzzled. Donovan frowned. What is that noise? Talia ignored him, her attention fixed on the stage. She found stories of self-made men vaguely distasteful, a reminder of the gritty work she preferred to ignore. On the roof, Maverick was being escorted through a service door that led to a private elevator. The organizer was speaking rapidly into a walkie-talkie. He's here. I have him. We are en route to backstage. ETA 90 seconds. The thumping grew louder. It was the sound of the slowing helicopter rotors, a sound that carried through the steel structure of the building. It was a sound of immense, controlled power. Now dozens of heads were turning, looking around the room, a low murmur starting to spread. The MC on stage pressed on, his voice rising slightly to be heard over the growing noise. A true Houston legend, a pioneer, and, as we are about to learn, a man with a flair for the dramatic. Ladies and gentlemen, the winner of this year's Industry Pioneer Award and your keynote speaker for the evening, Mr. Maverick. As his name was spoken, two things happened simultaneously. The massive video screens on either side of the stage, which had been showing the event's logo, switched to a live feed from a camera positioned on the rooftop helipad. The image was stark and powerful. A sleek, black helicopter, its blades still turning slowly, silhouetted against the glittering Houston skyline, and the main doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A single figure stood there, framed in the doorway, flanked by security. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit. He paused for a beat, his eyes scanning the room. The entire ballroom fell silent. The only sound was the lingering deep whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of the helicopter from the video feed. Every single person turned to look. At table 12, Talia's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. Her smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, uncomprehending shock. Her mind struggled to connect the man on the stage's introduction with the man in the doorway. It was impossible. He was supposed to be at home. He was her embarrassing husband. Donovan's jaw had gone slack. He stared, his face a comical picture of disbelief. Maverick took his first step into the room. The cameras started flashing, their strobes like lightning in the stunned silence. He walked down the central aisle, his pace unhurried, his expression unreadable. He didn't look at table 12. He didn't look at anyone. His focus was entirely on the stage at the front of the room. The walk felt like it took an eternity. With every step he took, the foundation of Talia's world crumbled a little more. The man she had dismissed, the man she had hidden away, was the undeniable center of gravity in a room full of the most powerful people in her city. He wasn't just at the party, he was the party. He reached the stage and took the stairs in 2 easy strides. He shook the MC's hand, accepted the heavy crystal award, and walked to the podium. He placed the award down gently and looked out at the sea of frozen faces. For the first time, he let his eyes drift to table 12. He met Talia's wide, horrified gaze. He held it for just 1 second, his expression a perfect blank. Then he turned his attention back to the microphone. The room was so quiet he could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "Thank you," he began, his voice calm, clear, and amplified to fill every corner of the vast space. "It's an honor to be here tonight." The consequences began to cascade before Maverick even finished his speech. The first was the social implosion, happening in real time. At table 12, Talia felt 3,000 pairs of eyes on her. She could feel the heat of their collective gaze, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and contempt. Her phone, sitting on the table beside her plate of untouched sea bass, began to vibrate silently. Then it vibrated again, and again. Texts from her friends, the women she lunched with and gossiped with. "OMG, is that Maverick? What is happening? Talia, are you okay? This is insane." She couldn't look down. She couldn't move. She was pinned by the sheer, crushing weight of her public humiliation. Donovan, beside her, had gone pale. His own phone was buzzing. The man he had derided as an oil baron was being celebrated as a visionary. The man he had replaced as Talia's date was the guest of honor. He looked small and insignificant in his velvet jacket, a court jester who had accidentally wandered into the king's throne room. Maverick's speech was 12 minutes of quiet power. He spoke about the future, about sustainable deep-water drilling, about the human element of the energy industry. He announced the expansion of his scholarship program at Texas A&M, pledging an additional $5 million to fund a new wing of the engineering department. He spoke with an authority and intelligence that captivated the room. There was not a single trace of the unpolished man Talia had described. This was a leader, a captain of industry in his natural element. When he finished, there was a beat of silence, and then the room erupted in a thunderous standing ovation. Business leaders, oil magnates, and politicians were on their feet, applauding the man Talia had deemed an embarrassment. The Houston Chronicle photographer's flash went off again and again, capturing the moment. Maverick on stage, bathed in light, accepting the accolades of his peers. Talia finally broke. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly on the floor. She stood up and fled, weaving through the tables, her head down, her sapphire gown a streak of blue misery. Donovan, after a moment's hesitation, scurried after her. Their exit was just as conspicuous as Maverick's entrance. The next morning, the consequences became tangible. The front page of the Houston Chronicle's business section featured a large, full-color photograph. It was of Maverick on stage, holding the Industry Pioneer Award, a look of calm confidence on his face. The headline read, "Maverick's Surprise Arrival and Keynote Dominate Energy Awards." The article detailed his dramatic helicopter entrance, his visionary speech, and his multi-million-dollar philanthropic pledge. It mentioned he was the event's primary underwriter. It did not mention his wife. Talia's phone became a weapon against her. She received over 50 calls before 10 a.m. friends, acquaintances, the wives of her husband's former colleagues. Some were feigning concern. Others were barely concealing their glee. Her social standing, which she had so carefully constructed, had been demolished overnight. The story was all over the city's elite circles. Talia, the woman who had tried to hide her husband, had instead been publicly exposed as a fool. Donovan's downfall was quieter, but just as complete. The owner of the art gallery he managed, a shrewd older woman who sat on several charity boards, had been at the awards. She called him into her office on Monday morning. The conversation was brief. His association with such a public and embarrassing spectacle was not aligned with the gallery's brand. He was fired. His trust fund provided him a comfortable life, but his career, the thing that gave him a veneer of purpose, was gone. On Wednesday morning at 9 a.m., a professional process server arrived at the River Oaks house. He was a large, impassive man in a nondescript sedan. He rang the bell and served Talia with the divorce petition Alani Adebayo had prepared. Talia stood in the marble foyer, the papers trembling in her hand. She read the sterile legal language, irreconcilable differences. She saw the division of assets. The house was his. The trust was his. The community property to be divided was the Range Rover and the $18,000 in their joint account. Her Maserati was hers. Her clothes were hers. Her jewelry was hers. But the entire foundation of her life, the home, the endless flow of money, the status of being Mrs. Maverick, was gone. Her frantic messages to Maverick began then, a desperate, escalating series of voicemails and texts. 10:15 a.m., voicemail. Mav, I just got these papers. This is a mistake, right? Some kind of joke? Call me. 11:30 a.m., text. Why are you doing this? After one little disagreement? It was a misunderstanding. I was just stressed. 1 p.m., voicemail. How could you humiliate me like that? In front of everyone. You did it on purpose, you cruel bastard. You wanted to hurt me. 3:45 p.m., text. Please, Maverick, we can fix this. I love you. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please just talk to me. 6 p.m., voicemail crying. They're going to take the house. My cards are being declined. What am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? You can't just throw me out. After everything, please, Mav. Please. Maverick listened to the voicemails once, his face impassive. He saved them, then deleted them. He did not reply to a single text. There was nothing left to say. He had given his speech. The consequences were simply the echoes of her own actions, reverberating back at her. 6 months later, the Houston autumn had settled in, a welcome respite from the long, oppressive heat of summer. Maverick stood on the banks of Buffalo Bayou in Sam Houston Park, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass. The roar of the city was a distant hum, muted by the rustling leaves of the old oak trees. He was no longer the CEO of a major corporation, nor was he the wounded husband in a gilded cage. He was just a man, enjoying the simple pleasure of a walk in the park. His life had been stripped down to its essential components, and he had found a peace he hadn't known was missing. The River Oaks house had been sold. The proceeds, all $4.2 million of it, had been added to his educational foundation. Living in that house felt like living in a museum of a life that was no longer his. He now lived in a sleek, modern penthouse apartment in a new high-rise overlooking the park, a space that was entirely his own, filled with engineering diagrams framed as art and books on geology and oceanography. His Ford F-250 was parked in the garage downstairs. It was all he needed. The divorce had been finalized quickly and quietly. Talia, represented by an expensive lawyer, had tried to contest the premarital trust, but Alani Adebayo had shut down every challenge with surgical precision. In the end, Talia walked away with the Maserati, the Range Rover, her personal effects, and a one-time settlement of $250,000, enough to start over, but nowhere near enough to sustain the lifestyle she had cultivated. The last he heard, she had moved to a smaller condo in the Galleria area and was trying to rebrand herself as a lifestyle consultant. He felt no anger toward her anymore, only a profound sense of pity. She had been so focused on the price of everything that she had never learned the value of anything. His days were now his own. He spent his mornings managing his investments and his afternoons overseeing his foundation. The Maverick Offshore Engineering Scholarship was now one of the most prestigious programs at Texas A&M, fully funding 30 students a year. He met with them regularly, not as a distant benefactor, but as a mentor. He saw the same hunger and drive in their eyes that he'd had as a young man. He pulled a folded piece of paper from the pocket of his jacket. It was a drawing given to him by the 10-year-old daughter of one of his scholarship students, a brilliant young woman from a rough part of Houston. He had met the family at a recent appreciation luncheon. The little girl, named Ania, had shyly handed him the drawing. He unfolded it now. It was a family portrait, drawn with the earnest, charming imprecision of a child. She had drawn her mother, a proud black woman with her hair in beautiful braids, holding a graduation cap. She had drawn herself, with beaded cornrows that seemed to bounce off the page. And she had drawn a tall man next to them, holding a giant wrench. Underneath, she had written in wobbly letters, "Maverick the Builder." She had used a brown crayon for his skin, just like hers. He smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. This was his legacy. Not the $80 million in a trust, not the dramatic helicopter landing, but this, the chance to build something new, to provide a foundation for others to create their own success. The drawing was more valuable to him than any diamond necklace or crystal award. True wealth, he had come to understand, wasn't about what you could acquire. It was about what you could build. It wasn't about being polished. It was about being authentic. It wasn't about the circles you moved in. It was about the lives you touched. He had been so focused on proving his worth in a world that didn't value him, he'd almost forgotten the world that did. He folded the drawing carefully and put it back in his pocket. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues. A new day was coming, and for the first time in a long time, he was truly free to enjoy it. The journey to discovering your own worth can be a long and difficult one, especially when the people closest to you don't see it. But finding that inner strength and redefining success on your own terms is the greatest victory. We hope Maverick's story inspires you to value your own unique talents and to never let anyone else define your worth. Thank you for joining us on Love Beyond Pride. Damon was 37 years old, a man whose life was measured in microns and precise calculations. As a biomedical engineer at the Cleveland Clinic, he earned a respectable $96,000 a year designing and refining the delicate instruments that saved lives. His hands, steady and sure in the lab, were now resting on the starched white linen of a tablecloth. Across from him, his wife, Imani, swirled a $22 glass of Sauvignon Blanc, her luminous, deep brown skin glowing under the soft, ambient light of the Mediterranean restaurant in Lakewood. The air smelled of grilled octopus and lemon. He knew exactly what was coming. He had been waiting for it for 243 days. Imani placed her glass down with a delicate click. Her eyes, usually warm, now holding a cool, appraising quality he had come to recognize as a precursor to a performance. "You know, Damon," she began, her voice a carefully modulated instrument of casual cruelty, "I've been thinking a lot about us, about how we started." He simply watched her, his expression neutral. He kept his breathing even. In his mind, a clock was ticking down the final seconds of his marriage. She sighed, a theatrical sound of profound reflection. "I think it's time I was completely honest with you. With myself, really." She leaned forward, her $4,200 Chanel handbag resting on the chair beside her like a silent, expensive accomplice. "I married you out of pity." There it was. The line. the exact sequence of words he had heard rehearsed in a hushed, conspiratorial phone call 8 months prior. The phrase designed to shatter his confidence, to make him scramble, to make him beg. If he begged, she would have leverage. If he left, she believed she would get half of everything. She had miscalculated on both counts. He had no idea how wrong she was. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. The clatter of cutlery from other tables faded. The low hum of conversation disappeared. There was only her expectant, slightly smug face and his own calm, measured silence. He saw the flicker of annoyance in her eyes when he didn't immediately crumble. He didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. He didn't ask why. He simply absorbed the words, the final piece of data, in a long and painful experiment. What do you think someone should do in a situation like this? When the person who vowed to love you reveals it was all a game? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Damon picked up his own glass, a simple iced water with a lemon wedge. He took a slow, deliberate sip. He placed the glass back on the table, aligning it perfectly with the edge of his bread plate. The condensation left a perfect, fleeting ring on the polished dark wood. He looked directly into Imani's eyes, his own gaze clear and steady. The stillness was his answer. "Thank you for the clarity," he said. His voice was even, devoid of anger or hurt. It was the voice he used in the lab to confirm a measurement. Factual. Final. He reached into the pocket of his $250 navy blazer, the one she'd said made him look less like a scientist. He pulled out his wallet, a worn leather thing he'd owned for a decade. He extracted 2 crisp $100 bills and placed them neatly on the table, more than enough to cover their $187.50 bill. He didn't look at the check. He had already calculated the total in his head. Then he stood up. He adjusted his cuffs. He looked down at Imani, whose perfectly constructed expression of condescending pity was now cracking, revealing the confusion underneath. Her mouth was slightly open. This was not the reaction the script had called for. "I'll have my attorney contact yours," Damon said. The words as clean and precise as a surgical incision. And with that, he turned and walked away. He didn't look back. He walked out of the restaurant, past the warmly lit patio, and into the cool Cleveland night, the sound of the door closing behind him like the final punctuation on a 4-year lie. 8 months earlier, their life in the $450,000 Tremont condo had been a portrait of domestic normalcy, at least on the surface. It was a life Damon had worked tirelessly to build. Their Saturdays were for the West Side Market, buying fresh pasta and organic vegetables, a routine that cost about $120 a week. He would cook, she would direct. He'd stand over the stove in his comfortable $40 jeans, stirring a sauce while Imani sat at their sleek $3,500 quartz island, scrolling through her phone, occasionally offering a critique. "A little more basil, sweetie. Don't let it get bitter." He thought it was her way of participating. He now knew it was her way of managing him. Their home was filled with her aesthetic. Minimalist, modern, and expensive. A $6,000 leather sectional dominated the living room, facing a 75-inch television that had cost him $2,800. The walls were adorned with abstract art she'd picked out from a gallery in the flats. 3 canvases that totaled over $9,000. His only contribution to the decor was a framed photo of his late mother, Mama, a beautiful, proud black woman with a kind smile. He'd placed it on his nightstand, a small personal altar in a home that felt increasingly like a showroom. He remembered the day they bought her car, a gleaming white BMW 3 Series. The sticker price was $43,000. He'd put down $10,000 from his savings, money he had carefully accumulated from freelance consulting projects. He drove a 2012 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles on it, a car he maintained himself. "It's reliable," he'd say with a shrug. "It's embarrassing," she'd reply, not unkindly, but with a dismissive little laugh that chipped away at him. "My husband, the brilliant engineer driving that old thing." He paid for their vacations. A $7,000 trip to Tulum, where she spent most of her time taking photos for her social media, curating an image of a perfect life. A $5,000 weekend in New York for her birthday, staying at a boutique hotel, and dining at restaurants where the entrees cost more than his weekly grocery budget. He paid for her wardrobe, a rotating collection of designer labels, Burberry, Armani, Chanel. He once saw a receipt for a single dress for a charity gala, $2,400. He wore an $89 Timex watch. She wore a $5,000 Cartier she'd called an investment. He never complained. He believed he was investing in their happiness. He saw her joy in these things and thought it was a reflection of their shared success. He saw her ambition to climb social ladders and thought he was supporting her dreams. He loved her, and he believed love was an act of service, of giving. He had no idea she was keeping a different kind of ledger, one where his generosity was recorded as weakness, his quiet nature as a lack of ambition, and his love as a tool to be leveraged. He was the stable, reliable foundation upon which she could build the life she truly wanted, and he was meant to be grateful for the privilege of paying for it. The facade was perfect, meticulously constructed, and he had been its most willing and most foolish architect. The discovery happened on a Tuesday in March. It was 6:47 p.m. A cold rain was slicking the streets of Tremont, and Damon had come home early from the lab, a rare occurrence. A critical simulation had finished hours ahead of schedule, and he was looking forward to surprising Imani, maybe suggesting they order in from their favorite Thai place. He let himself into the condo quietly. The lights in the main living area were off, but he could hear Imani's voice coming from their bedroom down the hall. She was on the phone. Her voice was low and animated, the way it got when she was talking to her sister, Sierra. He smiled to himself, setting his worn leather briefcase, which had cost him $150 10 years ago, on the floor. He started to unlace his practical waterproof work shoes. That's when he heard the words that stopped him cold. "No, you have to be strategic about it," Sierra was saying, her voice tinny through the phone, but her words perfectly clear in the silent apartment. "You can't just say, 'I'm unhappy.' That gives him room to argue, to promise to change. You need something that cuts the legs out from under him completely." Damon froze, one hand on his shoelace. He felt a prickle of unease. "Strategic? Like what?" Imani asked, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "What could I say?" "Something that makes him feel small," Sierra said, and Damon could almost picture her, leaning back on her own expensive sofa, a smug look on her face. "Something that reframes the whole marriage as a favor you did for him. Hit his pride. What about, 'I married you out of pity'?" The silence that followed stretched for an eternity. Damon's heart hammered against his ribs. Pity? The word was absurd. He loved her. He provided for her. He supported her. Where was the pity in that? Then Imani laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a sharp, calculating noise. "Oh, that's good," she breathed. "That's nasty, Cece. I love it." "Right?" Sierra said, pleased with herself. "Test it out. Plan a nice dinner, set the mood, and then just drop it on him. See what he does. If he begs, you have all the leverage. You can get him to agree to anything to fix things. A new decorating budget, that trip to Paris, anything. And if he gets mad and leaves—" There was a pause. "Well, then your lawyer says you get half anyway. It's a win-win for you, girl." "A win-win," Imani repeated, savoring the words. "Okay, I'll start planning. Give it a few months. Let him get comfortable. Maybe after his next project bonus comes in. Damon slowly sank down onto the small bench by the door. The rain lashed against the window, each drop a tiny hammer against the glass. The air in his lungs felt like ice. His entire 4-year marriage, the life he thought he was building, reconfigured itself in that instant. It wasn't a partnership, it was a long con, a game. And he had just been handed the rule book. He felt a wave of nausea, followed by a strange, chilling calm. The engineer in his brain took over, the part of him that dealt with data, with cause and effect, with stress tests and failure analysis. He was the subject of an experiment. His love, his devotion, his entire life with her. It was all just a variable in her equation. He stood up, his movements stiff and robotic. He picked up his briefcase. He quietly put his shoes back on, lacing them with trembling fingers. He turned around, opened the door, and walked back out into the rain. He walked for 2 hours, the cold water soaking his coat and hair, his mind a maelstrom of shock and betrayal. By the time he returned, the shock had cooled into something hard and solid. It was resolve. She wanted to run a test. Fine. He would spend the next 8 months preparing for the final exam. The 8 months that followed were a masterclass in deception. Damon became the perfect husband, a phantom playing a role. On the outside, nothing changed. On the inside, he was a different man, a strategist collecting data for a case he was building in the court of his own heart. He played dumb with a precision that would have made a professional actor proud. Just 2 weeks after overhearing the call, Imani came to him with a proposal. "Honey," she said, looking up from her laptop at the kitchen island, "Sierra's birthday is coming up, and I saw the most perfect gift for her. It's a bit of a splurge, though." She showed him the screen, a $3,800 Louis Vuitton tote bag. The old Damon would have hesitated, maybe suggested something more reasonable. The new Damon smiled warmly. "She's your sister, Imani. She deserves it. Of course, use the joint credit card." He watched her face light up, a genuine, uncomplicated flash of delight at his easy compliance. She thought she was winning, softening him up for the eventual test. He was simply documenting another expense, another piece of evidence of her financial recklessness. He made a note in a secure file on his personal laptop. March 28th, 7:15 p.m. Louis Vuitton tote for Sierra, $3,800 joint account. He attended family functions, smiling and making small talk with Sierra, the co-architect of his humiliation. At a family barbecue in July, Sierra pulled him aside. "You're such a good husband to my sister," she said, squeezing his arm. "She's so lucky. Not every man would be so accommodating." Damon met her gaze, his expression one of sincere humility. "She's the best thing that ever happened to me," he said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "I just want to make her happy." Sierra beamed, completely oblivious. He was no longer just a husband. He was an intelligence agent in his own home. Every night, he would come home, and they would perform their domestic ritual. "How was your day, sweetie?" she would ask, barely looking up from her phone. "Good," he'd say. "We're making progress on the new vascular stent prototype." "That's nice," she'd murmur, her thumb scrolling endlessly. She had never once asked a follow-up question about his work. She didn't know what a vascular stent was. She just knew his job provided the $96,000 salary that funded her lifestyle. He initiated conversations about their future, carefully laying traps. "You know," he said one evening, as they watched a show on their massive TV, "I was thinking, my next bonus should be pretty significant. Maybe we should put it toward paying down the mortgage." Imani turned to him, her brow furrowed. "Pay down the mortgage? Damon, that's so boring." I was thinking we could finally get the guest bathroom redone. I saw this Italian marble tile that would be incredible. It's only about 15,000.